Welcome STEPS Training Academy.
In today's video, you will be learning all about IELTS band scores. Now, what are band scores? When you take the IELTS test, you are given a final or overall band ranging from 1 to 9. So the highest that you can get is band 9. This shows your English ability. Now, the scores are used as an assessment criteria by, if you're taking general training, it will be the employers. If you're taking academic, these are the educational institutions. Now, it's the employer or educational institution that will decide the score they want you to get in order to offer you a job or course. It's up to you to ask them, what is my required band score? Where does the overall band score come from? It is the average rounded to the nearest whole or half band of the scores you achieve in the 4 components of the test, which are namely listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So there's no half band score for each module, but this would be in your overall band score. Say, for example, you got 6.5 in listening. In reading, you got 7. In writing, you got only 5.5, and in speaking, you got 6.5. Now, the total score would be 25.5, and then you divide it into 4, so the average would be 6.375. We round it up to the nearest whole or half band, so your overall band score is 6.5. How is each component scored? For listening reading, you have a total of 40 questions in each, and your final score in each item is then converted into a band score using a conversion table. For example, if you got 32 to 34 questions right in listening, this would be around 7.5. Now, for speaking, you are scored by an IELTS examiner during a face-to-face interview. A band score is then awarded for each criteria, which are, first would be your fluency and coherence. This would be your, if you speak smoothly. For lexical resource, this will be your vocabulary. And then third will be your grammatical range and accuracy. And then lastly would be your pronunciation. The criteria are weighted equally, and the final score is the average of the 4. Now, for writing, there are 2 tasks. For task 1, it would be a letter for general training. If it's academic, you will have a graph, a map, or a process. For task 2, it's the same for both general training and academic. So this will be an essay. So your final writing score comes from the average of 2. The task 2 essay is longer than task 1, so it is worth more and weighted more heavily when the averages are put together. So make sure that you do better in task 2. Now, how do I know what score my employer or university wants? As institutions set their own eligibility criteria, you would need to contact them or look at their website to find out what they require, as it varies greatly, and it's also different per country. The more prestigious the university, the more complex the course, or the more English needed to do a job well, the higher score they are likely to require. For example, in Australia, teachers are required to have band 8 in listening and speaking and 7 for the reading and writing. Is it the overall score or the score for each component that is important? Again, this is up to the institution. Some may just be interested in your overall score, and some are more lenient, but some may specify certain scores across the components. For example, if you want to study medicine at the University of Sydney, you must get an overall band score of 7, and you must also get 7 in each component. So overall band score with scores of 7, 7, 7, 7 is okay. Overall with 8, 6, 7, 7 is not okay, even if you got overall score of band 7, but you got a 6. So you need to retake the whole test. What if I don't agree with my score? If you think the score you have been given in any of the components is wrong, you can ask for a remark called inquiry on results. They will then look at one or all scores again, but you have to pay for it and the scores may not change. So it's a risk that you have to take. So it's up to you if you want to take that risk. How long are the scores valid for? They are valid for 2 years from the date that you took the test. So after 2 years, you need to retake again because they expire after 2 years. Welcome to the Guessing Meaning from Context lesson. Now, guessing meaning from context in the IELTS test is an important technique that will improve your reading skills and the speed with which you can read. Obviously, you don't have a dictionary in the test, so there are likely to be a lot of words from the reading text that you don't understand and you can't check. What is guessing the meaning context, by the way? If you come across a word you don't understand, then you can't spend a lot of time working out its meaning because you only have 20 minutes for each reading. Thus, guessing meaning from context is necessary. Guessing meaning from context means working out what a word means or have a good guess at least from the words that are around it and from the topic of the paragraph. So, how do you guess the meaning? Now, take a look at this example. It had been raining hard through the night, so the ground was saturated. What does saturated mean? You may already know, but if you don't, you should be able to have a good guess from the rest of the sentence. It had been raining, which means the ground must be wet. It was raining hard, so this means the ground is probably very wet. Thus, the meaning of saturated is completely wet. By doing this, you are guessing meaning from context, and you should try and use this technique for words you don't know. It may not always be clear from the actual sentence, and you may have to look at other sentences around the word. However, only do this for words that seem important for an understanding of the text. If it looks like they're not, then leave it and move on with the reading. You probably won't have time to do it with every word, especially if you are at a lower reading level. Welcome to the IELTS Rating Strategy to Increase Reading Speed lesson. Now, the aim of this exercise is to develop your IELTS reading strategies in order to find the answers to questions such as short answer as quickly as possible. Now, how do I find answers quickly? The key to doing this quickly is to recognize the section of the text which relates to the question. However, it's usual to find that the question stem will include words that are synonyms of the words rather than words from the actual text. Or, if it's not synonyms, there will be phrases that have the same meaning as a phrase in the text. If they did not do this, it would be too easy to find the answers. Now, here is an example of an IELTS reading strategies exercise. The title of the passage is Hong Kong Takes Steps to Improve English. Let's read paragraph A together. The Hong Kong government today published proposals to introduce basic English language competency assessments for primary, secondary, and university students as well as some professionals. The goal is to bolster written English and Chinese as well as spoken English and Mandarin in the former British colony. Let's look at question 1 and compare it with paragraph A. Which words help you identify the answer? Let's read the question. How does the Hong Kong government intend to measure the level of spoken English? Now, the Hong Kong government indicates that we're looking at the correct paragraph, but we need to find how they intend to measure. So let's underline the keywords Hong Kong government and intend to measure. Now, the word proposals is used as a noun in the text, but to propose is a verb that means intend. So we can say that the Hong Kong government intends to introduce basic English language competency assessments. Now, to assess means to measure the level of something. In this case, we know that they want to measure people's basic English. So, looking back at the text, so we find the answer here. We have the Hong Kong government, and then proposals, and then introduce basic English language competency assessments. So that's where we find the answer. So the answer is to introduce competency assessments, and the paragraph indicator is the Hong Kong government, and the words that help to identify would be proposals and assessments. So you can use these IELTS reading strategies to help you find answers to questions quickly. Welcome to the skimming and scanning lesson. Now, before we dive into skimming and scanning, let's talk about speed reading. What is speed reading? You may be used to read every word slowly and carefully to understand every sentence of the text. But on the IELTS reading test, you are limited in time and it's impossible to read attentively all the information. But how to read more in less time? One way is to use speed reading, which means quickly reading the text according to your purpose, getting only the information you need. So we'll dive into the speed reading techniques through skimming and scanning. Now, what is skimming? Skimming means quickly reading the text to get only its main idea. And to skim effectively, you need to read only a part of the material. You have already encountered skimming when reading a long chapter of a book or researching a long article. In such a case, you would probably read the first sentences of each paragraph, dropping down to the end of the paragraph. So how do we skim? First step, read the first paragraph attentively to get an idea of what will be discussed in the text. Second, read the first and sometimes the second sentence of each paragraph so they give the main idea of the paragraph. Third step, after you have read the first sentences, your eyes should drop down to the end of the paragraph looking for important pieces of information such as dates, names, places. And lastly, read the last paragraph attentively as it may contain the summary. So here is an example of a skimming exercise. So we have here the article, What is Capitalism? So first step, attentively read the first and the last paragraphs. And then next, read only the first sentence for these body paragraphs and then drop down to the end looking for key details. So here, the key details have already been underlined for you. Now let's go to scanning. What is scanning? Scanning means searching for specific phrases in the text to answer some questions. Underline. The questions on the IELTS reading test often includes dates, names, numbers, new terms, and other keywords. So it's a very good idea to underline those keywords while reading, so you could find the answers in the text more easily. Now, how do we scan? First step, underline the important information while reading the text, such as dates, numbers, and names, etc. And then second step, when you read the question, identify the keyword and scan the text for it. This way, you'll find the answer more quickly. So again, let's go back to the article, What is Capitalism? So in scanning, you look for specific keywords, such as social system, capitalist, profit. Now let's do some practice. Like on a real IELTS reading test, you have to read the text and answer the questions that follow. First of all, let's practice skimming. When reading a text for the first time, you should skim over it to grasp the main idea. In this example, read the highlighted text and quickly look over the rest of the text. You have about 1 to 2 minutes. So here is the passage. Are electric cars really eco-friendly? So you can pause the video and you have 2 minutes to read this passage. Now, after you have skimmed the text, you should get the general idea. So the general idea is one man imported an electric car to Singapore and was fined for that because the car was considered as a polluter. It turned out that electric cars can also be dangerous for the environment because the electric energy used to charge them is produced at power station, which emit pollutants. Now let's go through the question. 1. What is the aim of this text? A. To discourage people from visiting Singapore. Letter B. To prove that electric cars are less eco-friendly than fossil fuel-powered machines. Or letter C. To show that we need to count the emissions of power stations to see how green an electric car is. Now this question can be answered immediately after you skim over the text. Here, you're required to understand only the main idea of the passage. Obviously, the correct answer is C. It's also stated in the last paragraph, but what about the bigger picture? Should we be factoring in the emissions of power stations when working out how green an electric car is? The logical answer is yes. Now let's go to question number 2. When the owner of the electric car went to Singapore, he received a rebate of around US 10,800, or B, a fine of around 10,800 US dollars, or C, a fine of around 15,000 US dollars. So in this question, unlike the previous one, requires specific detail, the amount of money. So to answer it, you should scan the text for words 10,800 and 15,800. Don't read the text again. Just search these two keywords. Once you have found the right sentence, read it attentively to get the answer. Now, the sentence that contains these keywords is in the third paragraph. Instead of an expected rebate of around 15,000 or 10,800 US dollars, he received a fine of the same amount for being a gross polluter. So now it's clear to us that the correct answer is B. Now let's go to question 3. To prove that electric car was a gross polluter, the authorities in Singapore calculated the blank of generating the electricity to charge the car. Now, after you have skimmed over the article, you should know that the Singapore authorities and charging car were mentioned somewhere in the middle of the text. Moreover, you have another clue. The answer should be after the answer to question 3. So you can find the right answer by these keywords: authorities in Singapore and electricity to charge a car. If you scan the text for these keywords, you will find the answer in the fourth paragraph. The Singapore authorities calculated the carbon cost of generating electricity that will be used to charge the car. So the correct answer is carbon costs. Welcome to the Understanding the IELTS Reading Test module. Now here's a brief overview of the IELTS reading test. If you're taking IELTS to study abroad, then you will take the academic IELTS reading module. If you are taking IELTS for other purposes, such as working abroad, then you will take the general training reading module. Either way, improving your reading for IELTS is important as you will face some complex reading and difficult vocabulary. This lesson aims to give you the skills and practice to tackle the reading module. Both IELTS reading tests, academic and general training, aim to assess the following skills. First would be reading for gist. Number 2, reading for main ideas. Number 3, reading for details. Number 4, understanding inferences and implied meaning. Number 5, recognizing a writer's opinion. Number 6, attitudes and purpose. And number 7, following the development of an argument. Now here's the difference between the academic and general. For the academic, it's 60 minutes with 40 questions, and there are 3 readings. The tests are taken from journals, magazines, books, and newspapers, and it's a general interest text written for non-specialist audience. For the general, it's also 60 minutes long and also 40 questions. However, there are 5 to 6 readings. The texts are taken from advertisements, it could be booklets, leaflets, manuals, notices, newspapers, and magazines. And texts are more related to everyday life, work, and general interests. Now let's move to the academics IELTS reading module first. Now in terms of the reading passages, there are 3 reading passages with a total of around 2,150 to 2,750 words. And these texts are taken from journals, magazines, books, and newspapers. All of the topics are of general interest, and the texts have been written for a non-special audience. And the readings are intended to be about issues that are appropriate to candidates who will enter postgraduate or undergraduate courses. At least one text will contain detailed logical argument. One of the texts may contain nonverbal material. It could be graphs, it could be illustrations, or it could be diagrams. Now, if there are technical terms which you may not know in the text, then a glossary is provided, and then the text and questions become more difficult through the paper. Now, in terms of the instructions, they are clear and very easy to follow, and you'll be provided with examples of any unfamiliar question types. Text and questions appear on a question paper which you can write on but not take away from the test room. You must answer all the questions on an answer sheet during the 60 minutes, and there is no extra time at the end to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now, the position of the question varies, Some of the question may come before the passage or some can come after the passage, and it will depend on the question type. Now, let's move on to the GEL training module. As with the academic IELTS reading, the GEL training reading module takes also 60 minutes, and there are also 40 questions in total. Each one is worth 1 mark. Now, in terms of the reading passages, there are around 2,150 to 2,750 words, and each text being harder than the one before. Now, in contrast to the academic reading, the texts are taken from advertisements, it could be notices, booklets, official documents, leaflets, newspapers, timetables, instruction manuals, books, and magazines. And they are all authentic passages. And these are texts that you're likely to have to deal with daily in an English-speaking country. Now, let's go through each section for the GEL training module. For section 1, it will contain around 2 to 3 short factual texts with topics that will be relevant to your everyday life when you live abroad in an English environment. For example, it could be a text that consists of a number of advertisements. For section 2, there are 2 factual texts and they focus on issues related to work, such as applying for a job, pay and conditions, staff training, and development and company policies. For section 3, in this section, it's longer and more difficult. It's a text on a topic of general interest. Now, here are the IELTS reading task sites that you will encounter in both the academic and GEL training module. So first, it could be short answer questions, and then you might also encounter multiple choice. Number 3, sentence completion, notes, summary, diagram, flowchart, table completion, choosing a heading for a paragraph. And then number 6, identification of writer's views, claims, or the yes, no, not given, identification of information, true, false, or not given, and classification, and lastly, matching lists and phrases. We will tackle each of these reading task types in the next coming days. Welcome to the IELTS Reading Gap Fill. Now, a reading gap fill is one task you may get in the IELTS test. You have filled in the gaps of summary or part of the text using words from a box. There may be more words than you need to use, so you need to find the part of the reading that refers to the summary and make sure that you work out which word will fit. You also need to think about the grammar, as the word you put in the reading gaps must fit grammatically as well. So let's talk about some general strategies. First, read through the summary carefully to make sure you understand it, and then try to work out which section of the reading the summary comes from. So in this example, the whole of the text is summarized, but in the real test, you'll need to look through the reading to find the right paragraphs. Third, carefully read the sentence with the first gap and think about what form will it be. Should it be an adjective? Would it be a noun, an infinitive, a present participle, etc.? And what type of word is needed? Is it an amount, a change, or an action? Next, you should have worked out that for question 1, you're looking for a noun because there's an article "and" comes before it. And then look at the words that are in the box, which ones have the right form to fit and the right type. So there are several nouns. So if you're looking for a noun, then try to eliminate the verbs or the adjectives. Next, look at the correct part of the full reading that refers to the reading gap fill section you're looking at and decide what happened for the first time to do with air rage in the 1940s. And then lastly, use the information to help you choose the correct word for the reading gap fill. So here is an example of a summary completion based on the air rage passage. So let's look at the first sentence. The first time that an blank of air rage was recorded was in the 1940s, but the passenger was never actually charged for an offense because there were no clear rules in place to specify where to prosecute. So here, try to underline the keywords that will help you find in the passage. So you have air rage and then the 1940s because numbers are can be easily find, and then first time. So here the clue here is "and," which means try to find if you're looking for a noun, verb, or adjective. So in this case, we're looking for a noun because of the article an. And then since it's an article and, therefore we're looking for a vowel, the noun that starts with a vowel. So if you look here, the answers, we have nouns that are start with a vowel. We have injury, incident, and assault. So we find that the answer could be an incident. Welcome to the multiple choice lesson. Now, the objectives for this lesson would be to practice IELTS multiple choice questions. Second, to practice scanning techniques. And then third, to look at the use of synonyms in IELTS reading questions. Now, here are some strategies when answering the multiple choice question. First is look through the questions first, and then underline the keywords from the question. And then next, we will apply the scanning techniques. You need to scan the text for those keywords that you have underlined. And then fourth step, the answer should be found close to that word. And then number 5, the answers will be found in the text in the same order as the question. Now, things that you need to be aware of. There will be synonyms used in the reading. You will rarely see the exact words. So make sure that you try to practice your vocabulary. Now, here is an example of a multiple choice question. What is dry farming? So we need to underline here, dry farming. And then here are the choices. A, preserving nitrates and moisture. B, plowing the land again and again. And letter C, cultivating the fallow land. So here is the sample passage. It's about the Australian agricultural innovations 1850 to 1900. Now, in the second paragraph, we find the word dry farming. So here we find in the sentence, one of the most important was dry farming. So here, underline here and here. And then we look for the answer in the next sentence. This was the discovery that repeated plowing of fallow unproductive land could preserve nitrates and moisture, allowing the land to eventually cultivate it. Now be careful with exact words, so sometimes they can be distractors. So if we go back to the question, what does cultivating mean? Cultivating means to improve and prepare land by plowing or fertilizing for raising crops. So the answer is C, cultivating fallow land. So we find it from the text, the plowing of fallow land to eventually be cultivated. Welcome to the sentence completion task. Now, the objective for this is to practice how to answer IELTS sentence completion tests and to examine paraphrasing and synonyms. Often in the reading, the test requires the candidate to complete a sentence. Now, what are sentence completion questions? In this type of test, you are given a sentence from the reading with a gap in it, and then you have to fill in with words taken directly from the reading. Now, check if the question tells you to use the exact words from the reading. Some do not. When doing this, various factors are important to keep in mind. Make sure the answer does not exceed the stated word limit. Articles and unneeded adjectives can sometimes be left out to achieve this. Second, make sure the answer fits into the statement grammatically. Check if you're looking for a noun, a verb, or is it an adjective. And then be aware that the statement will not use the same words as the text. Now let's look at paraphrasing and synonyms. As a statement you're given in IELTS sentence completion task will not be taken exactly from the reading, you need to be aware of paraphrasing and synonyms. These will both be used in a question. So when we say paraphrase, it means to repeat something written or spoken using different words. When you say synonym, it's a word or phrase which has the same or nearly same meaning as another word or phrase in the same language. So when you look at the question, you will need to find a paraphrase of that, and then probably some synonyms in the reading in order to find the right answer. Now let's look at the practice exercise. Britain decided to send people to live and govern Australia due to a blank factors. So we need to underline the keywords that will help you find the answer in the passage. So we can underline live and govern Australia and decided. So here, blank factors. So try to find out what we're looking for. Is it a noun, a verb, or an adjective? So A would give you an idea that we're looking for a noun. So let's look at the sample passage. European settlement of Australia. So here we can find the synonyms in this second paragraph. A number of reasons contributed to Britain's decision to colonize Australia. So we find decide, but what we have here is a noun, and then colonize, which is a synonym of govern. So therefore, we're looking for a noun for factors. So you have here, after article A, number, reasons is also a synonym of factors. So thus, we find the answer in number. So you should identify it as this first sentence, paragraph 2, a number of reasons contributed to Britain's decision to colonize Australia. So, and these were the paraphrases. Reason, factors, colonize, send people to live and govern. So the correct answer is Britain decided to send people to live and govern Australia due to a number of factors. Welcome to the short answers lesson. Now here are some tips to remember when doing the IELTS short answers. First step, read the instructions carefully and check how many words you can use. In this example, it's a maximum of 3. So even an article A or the could void your answer. In IELTS short answer question, you should use words from the text rather than your own. Never change the words. So if it's a plural word, make sure that you use plural. If it's a past tense word, make sure that you use the past tense. Next, quickly read through all the questions so you get an idea of what information you will have to find in the text. And then use the keywords from the question to help you skim the text quickly to find the information. So underline the keywords. For example, in the first question, you need to look for the type of care. So underline the type of care. Next, remember though that synonyms will also be used in the text. So you must be careful when you look for the information. And then read the section of the text where you know the answer is carefully to see which words will answer the question. And your answer must make sense grammatically to be correct. And another thing that you need to remember, the answers are arranged in logical order. Now, let's look at an example of short answer question. So let's look at the instruction. Answer the following questions in no more than 3 words. So make sure that you don't answer more than 3 words because even an article A or the could void your answer. Now, let's look at the first question, question 11. Where should the type of care the writer discusses initially come from? So we underline the type of care. So this is the thing that we will look for in the passage. Now, let's see the example passage. So the title of the article is Education Industry Revving Up. So again, we underline the keyword type of care. And we can see that it's found in the second paragraph. So we found the exact word type of care. So where we're looking for a place. So if we read the complete sentence, this type of care begins in the student's home country, ensuring they have correct information about our country and how different it will be in many small and large ways. So we're looking for the answer, student's home country. So the correct answer is student's home country. Welcome to the true, false, not given lesson. Now, this lesson will explain how to answer true, false, not given questions for IELTS. First, you will be presented with a list of facts. You then have to look at the text in order to decide if the facts are true, false, or not given. Now, here are some tips that you need to remember. If the fact you're given is clearly in the reading, then it is true. If the reading says the opposite of the fact you've been given, then it's false. If it's not true or false, then it is not given. Now, here are some strategies to answer the true, false, not given questions. Now remember, the questions follow the order of the text. Say for example, question 1 will be found in paragraph 1, question 2 will be found in paragraph 2, then for question 3, look paragraph 3 downward, so don't look too far away. And then next, scan the text to find where the answer is using keywords from the question. So try to underline those keywords, usually the opinions. And then when you find where the answer is, read the text carefully to identify if you think it's true, false, or not given. And then remember, the questions will probably use synonyms rather than the exact words. So make sure that you try to practice your vocabulary. Now, next, look out for controlling words such as only, all, never. For example, if the question of question says some and the fact in the text says all, then definitely it's false. And don't spend a long time looking for an answer to one question. It's probably not given if you cannot find it. So just read it twice. If you cannot find it, then write not given. So don't waste time looking for something that is not there. Make sure you use the correct code. Yes, no information is sometimes used. So these questions are slightly different and you look for opinions rather than facts. Now let's look at this example statement taken from the first sentence in the reading. Now, chiles originate in South America and have been eaten for at least 9,500 years. Now let's look at some of the examples of IELTS true, false, not given statements with answers. So first, chiles come from South America. So why it's true? Because you can find a statement that originate and come from are synonyms. And then, of course, there's no synonym for South America, and you find it in the text. So that's why the first statement is true. Next, let's go to question number 2. People began eating chiles in the last few centuries. Now, here, let's try to underline in the last few centuries. So try to underline numbers and check. If we look at the original, it says at least 9,500 years. So that's why at least 9,500 years is not the same as in the last few centuries. That's why the answer is false. And now let's look at question number 3. South Americans were the first people to start eating chiles. So here we try to underline the keyword from this question. First people and then South Americans. So if we compare it with the statement, there's no mention of South Americans and there's also no mention of first people. So don't make assumptions. Don't base your answers from assumptions. So it's possible, since Chile's origin in South America, that South Americans were the first people, but we don't know for sure. So that's why we write not given. Welcome to Matching Headings to Paragraphs section. Now the objective is to practice matching paragraph headings to paragraphs. Now, a common type of IELTS reading question will ask you to select headings of paragraphs and match them to the paragraphs from a text. Now let's go through each strategy. First step, quickly read through the paragraph headings so you can see what they say and underline the keywords. Second, look at the first paragraph and try to read the topic sentence. Often, only the topic sentence need to be read carefully because the main idea and answer are there. You may be able to just skim the rest. Now, sometimes, however, the answer is not in the topic sentence and the whole paragraph needs to be read more carefully. If a match is not immediately obvious, move on to the next one. If you're unsure between two answers at first, put them both in. You may be able to eliminate one answer later if it fits another paragraph better. Because if you put one answer and then it's wrong, you automatically get two incorrect answers. Lastly, if at the end you're still stuck between two answers for a question, pick which one is the best. Now, here are some things to be aware of. There are always more choices of paragraph headings on the list than paragraphs, so be careful when matching them. Next, watch out for synonyms. Often words in the paragraphs and paragraph headings will not be the same. They will be synonyms. Next, having a noun from a heading that is in the paragraph does not guarantee they match. You will still need to read it carefully to check. So sometimes a noun in a heading is a verb in the passage. Now let's go through one paragraph practice exercise. Now after you have read the headings and underlined the keywords, let's read the first sentence in the first paragraph, because in the first sentence, that's where it usually is the topic sentence. The Yoruba people of Nigeria classify their towns in two ways. Now let's go through each heading. So first, town facility. Yes, there's a mention of town, but it doesn't say anything about facilities. Now, for letter B, colonization is wrong because there's nothing there that mentions about colonization. C, urban divisions, you might consider this, but then there is a better answer. And then D, architectural styles, there's no mention of architecture, neither home styles. And lastly, we have E, type of settlements. So here, types is a synonym for classify, and settlements is a synonym for towns. Therefore, E is your correct answer. Welcome to the Academic Task 1 Describing Trends lesson. Now, this lesson explains how to describe a line graph or bar chart for IELTS Task 1 that is over time. This uses an example of a bar chart, but it will be the same for a line graph. Now, here are the types of language that you need. When you get a chart or graph to describe, it's always important to check whether there is a time frame or not. If there is, you will need to use the language of change, which means increase, decrease. However, it's not enough just to describe the changes of each element, like ActiveX, Java, and Net in this case, on their own, and ignore how they relate to each other. So look at the question. It says, summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So you're asked to compare the data as well. So you must also compare the elements where relevant in your IELTS task. Example, most popular, lower, and the least. So here is a sample graph and answer. You should spend about 20 minutes on this task. The bar chart shows the number of times per week in 1000s over 5 weeks that 3 computer packages were downloaded from the internet. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Write at least 150 words. So here is a sample of the graph, the bar graph. So we have the three variables, ActiveX, Java, and Net for weeks 1 up to week 5. So let's look at our plan. So we start with an introduction. So write a one-sentence paraphrase of the question. And for your overview, make sure you have a one sentence describing the trends. Is it increasing, decreasing, or if it's a fluctuating trend? And then for your body paragraph 1, so we combine ActiveX and Java because they both have the same trend, while body paragraph 2, we have the Net because it has the opposite trend. So make sure that you use different language of change. So here are some examples. Gradually increasing, or it could be a slight fall, kept rising, reach a peak, increase at a steady rate, fell, increase sharply, a low of, finish at, stood at, and finishing the period at. So now let's look at our sample answer. So you have your introduction, which is a paraphrase of the question. The bar chart illustrates the download rate per week of ActiveX, Java, and Net computer packages over a period of 5 weeks. And then for your overview, which one is the most popular. It can be clearly seen that ActiveX was the most popular computer package to download, while Net was the least popular of the three. So now we have for our first body paragraph, we combine ActiveX and Java because they have similar patterns. Make sure you also use the correct tense, which is past tense, and then you use also some linking words. To begin with, downloads of ActiveX and Java showed similar patterns with both gradually increasing from week 1 to week 5. However, the purchases of ActiveX remain significantly higher than that of the other products over this time frame. In week 1, purchases of ActiveX stood at around 75,000, while those of Java were about 30,000 lower, except for a slight fall in week 4, downloading of ActiveX increasing until it reached a peak in the final week of just over 120,000. Java download also had a steady rate, finishing the period at 80,000. So now let's move to body paragraph 2, which talks about the net. The product that was downloaded least was net. This began at slightly under 40,000 and in contrast to the other two products, fell over the next 2 weeks to reach a low of approximately 25,000. It then increased sharply over the following 2 weeks to finish at about 50,000, which was below that of ActiveX. So here we have different linking words like in contrast, then, and then make sure that you have a variety of graph vocabulary like slightly, reach a low of, increase sharply, well below that. So that's how you write a graph that describes trends. Welcome to the academic task 1, describing two graphs together. So this is an example of an IELTS bar and line graph together. So it's not uncommon to get two graphs to describe at the same time in the IELTS test. So it can be intimidating at first. However, when you look more closely, you'll see it is probably no more difficult than having one graph. So let's look at the sample question. You should spend about 20 minutes on this task. The line graph shows visits to and from the UK from 1979 to 1999, and the bar graph shows the most popular countries visited by UK residents in 1999. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Write at least 150 words. So here is first the line graph, visits to and from the UK. So the first line talks about visits abroad by UK residents, and then the line 2 would be visits to the UK by overseas residents. So these are the years 1979 to 1999. Next, we have the bar graph, which talks about the most popular countries visited by UK residents 1999. So we have here 5 countries: Turkey, Greece, USA, Spain, and France. So let's look at our plan. So how do we organize this? So again, we start with an introduction, which is again a paraphrase of the question. And in the overview, give what would be the highlights of the two graphs. And then the first body paragraph, you talk first the line graph. And then for the second body paragraph, you talk about the bar chart. So here is our introduction. When you state what the graph shows, mention both of them. So here's a sample first sentence of the introduction. The line graph illustrates the number of visitors in millions from the UK who went abroad and those that came to the UK between 1979 and 1999, while the bar chart shows which countries were the most popular for UK residents to visit in 1999. So remember to write this in your own words and do not copy from the question. And if you notice, even though these are past years, you will notice that the tense is in the present tense. Why? Because the graph is constant. So when you're talking about the graph, you use present tense, but when you're talking about the variables, use the past tense. Next, you need to mention the key points from the graph. So when you do this, you mention the most interesting things from each. So here is where you write your overview. So write only a one-sentence overview. And when you write your overview, make sure that you don't put any figures. So you start with overall, you can say in general. Overall, it can be seen that visits to and from the UK increased and that France was the most popular country to go to. So you highlight what would be the trend for the first line graph, and for the second bar graph, you highlight which is the most popular country to go to, and that is France. Now we go to the body paragraph. So if there are two graphs and a lot of information, you will have to be careful not to describe everything. Otherwise, you might not be able to finish the task. Also, The examiner is looking to see that you can select the important things and not describe every single detail. So the key skill when you have two graphs is being able to pick out the important information or summarize things in a concise way. Otherwise, you will end up writing too much and probably run out of time. So again, let's look back to our first graph, which is the line graph. And let's look at how we should write the body paragraph. So you have your linking word. To begin with, the number of visits abroad by UK residents was higher than for those that came to the UK, and this remains so throughout the period. The figure started at a similar amount, around 10 million, but visits abroad increased significantly to over 50 million, whereas the number of overseas residents rose steadily to reach just under 30 million. So you have your linking words to begin with, you also have but and whereas. And here we have our graph vocabulary: higher, remained, started, increased significantly, rose steadily. Now let's go to our second graph, the bar graph, and let's look at how we should write the body paragraph too. By far, the most popular countries to visit in 1999 were France at approximately 11 million visitors, followed by Spain at 9 million. The USA, Greece, and Turkey were far less popular at around 4, 3, and 2 million visitors respectively. So in the bar graph, we are actually comparing the countries. So we should rank them from highest to lowest. So we have here used the comparative vocabulary: most popular, and that is France. And then the second one is Spain. And then you have there your graph vocabulary: less popular, or USA, Greece, and Turkey at around 4, 3, and 2 million visitors respectively. So that is how you should write a graph with two line and a bar graph. Welcome to the Academic Task 1 Maps lesson. Now, in an IELTS Task 1 map, you often have to compare a map from the past with one from the present. Now, the Writing Task 1 sample map shows you an example of one of these types of question with a model answer. Now, how do we organize it? You have several choices for how to organize an IELTS Task 1 map, such as the one that I'll be discussing. You could choose the various features in turn, such as the fishing port and market in the past. Then note how these have now gone with the market replaced by apartments. Or you could describe everything in the first map, then everything in the second map. So we will talk about how this sample answer is organized. Either way, make sure yet you describe all the key features in the IELTS Task 1 map and don't miss any. And then make sure that you use the right tenses. So you need to use past tense for the first IELTS Task 1 map in 1995 and use the present tense for the present day one. So here is a sample question. You should spend about 20 minutes on this task. The map below shows the development of the village of Rymount between 1995 and present. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Write at least 150 words. So here is an example of a map. So we have the first 1995 and then the present map. So let's look at our plan. So you start with an introduction and you have an overview which describes the major changes. And for your body paragraph 1, so you can opt to discuss the 1995 map first. And then for body paragraph 2, you describe the present map. So here is a sample answer. So you can just restate the introduction. The map shows how a village called Rymount has developed over the last 25 years. And then for your overview, give what are the major changes. Overall, there have been several changes, the most noticeable being the increases in accommodation, the elimination of the fishing industry, and the introduction of sports facilities. So now here we write the 1995 first. So you refer in 1995 to the south of village where the sea is. There was previously a fishing industry with a fishing port and quite a large fish market as well. And then make sure that you have your linking word. Next to this was a small cafe. On the other side of the road, running by the sea, stood a line of 5 shops and a hotel, while situated in the northeast part of the village was a farmland and a park with trees. The main housing of the village was located in the northwest around the main road that runs from the coastal road with 12 houses and then encircled by a smaller side street. So here, make sure that you use location vocabulary such as northeast, northwest, beside, next. Now we go to our body paragraph 2, which talks about the present day map. So use linking words. Turning to the present day map, it can be seen that the fishing facilities have all gone, being replaced by 4 apartments, and the shops have become restaurants. The cafe remains, as does the hotel, albeit with parking facilities which it did not have before. Having been converted into a golf course, the farmland has now gone, while the forest park has been removed to make way for tennis courts. Although the old houses remain, the new ones have been built along with a new road with 2 new houses beside it. So you can use the present tense or the present perfect tense to talk about the changes or developments. So here you use the development vocabulary like have all been gone, replaced, have become, having been converted, has been removed, remain, have been built. So that's how you try to write an IELTS map essay. Welcome to the Understanding the IELTS Writing lesson. Now let's go through the IELTS writing test. Now the IELTS writing test module varies depending on whether you're doing the academic test for university applications or the general test, usually for work or general migration. In IELTS academic, you have to describe a graph or a diagram for task 1 and write an essay for task 2. In IELTS General Training, you have to write a letter for task 1 and write an essay for task 2. Now, the task 2 essay is actually worth more marks than task 1 graph or letter, so you should spend 40 minutes of the time on the essay and 20 minutes on the graph. This difference in marking is representing the number of words you have to write, which is a minimum of 150 for task 1 and 250 for task 2. Now here, let's look at the academic. For task 1, you have to write a 150-word essay wherein you describe a graph or diagram, while in task 2, you have to write a 250-word essay. For the general training, you have to write a letter for 150 words, while in task 2, you will also do the same for 250 words in writing an essay. Now, let's go first to the academic task 1. In the first section, you will need to describe, summarize, or explain a graph, diagram, or it could be a process. Now, let's look at a sample question. Here it says you should spend about 20 minutes on this task. The chart shows components of GBE in the UK from 1992 to 2000. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Write at least 150 words. So here is an example of a graph. You will have to describe the chart in no less than 150 words. In this section, you could also get a line graph. It could be a pie chart, a process, a table, or a map to describe. Now let's move on to academic task 2. Now, task 2 is an essay question. You will have to write a response to the question, giving reasons and examples to support your answer. The topics are of general interest. So here's an example of a question. You should spend about 40 minutes on this task. Write about the following topic. The dangers and complexities of the modern world have made the mobile phone an absolute necessity for children. To what extent do you agree or disagree? Give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own experience. Write at least 250 words. Now let's go to General Training Task 1. The task of the General Training module is to write a letter. You will be presented with a situation and you will need to write your letter explaining the situation or asking for information. So the letter may be one of 3 styles. It could be personal, it could be a semi-formal letter, or it could be a formal letter like a job or for education. Your response will have to reflect the appropriate style. Now, here is an example question. You want to sell your television. You think a friend of yours might like to buy it from you. Write a letter to your friend. In your letter, explain why you're selling the television. You have to describe the television and suggest a date when your friend can come and see it. Write at least 150 words. You do not need to write any address. Begin your letter as follows, dear. So in this example, this is an example of an informal letter. Now for task 2, it's also the same for academic, and you will need to write an essay responding to a point of view, argument, or problem. However, on the test day, the essay will be different to the one given to those taking the academic module. The essays are sometimes in a slightly more personal style than for the academic essay, but you need to follow the same methods for writing the essay. Welcome to the complex essay question lesson. In this lesson, we'll look at an IELTS music essay in order to explain how to approach a more complex IELTS task 2 question. Many questions have a clear task. For example, the task may clearly state that you need to agree or disagree, offer solutions to a problem, or give the reasons why a problem exists. Now let's look at this sample question. You should spend about 40 minutes on this task. There are many types of music in the world today. Why do we need music? Is the traditional music of a country more important, and should it be preserved? Or is international music that is heard everywhere nowadays more useful to a society? Write about the following topic, give reasons for your answer, and include any relevant examples from your own experience or knowledge. Write at least 250 words. Now, first you need to understand the question. When you get a more complex IELTS task question like this, you should make sure you underline important words and carefully break it down into its different parts. This will make sure that you don't miss something when you answer the question. When you have done this, you should hopefully end up with something like this. First, why do we need music? Next, why is traditional music important? Should it be preserved? Why is international music important? And which is the most important? So you need to discuss all these things as they are all within the IELTS music essay question. If you address all of these points, then you will be fully answering the question. These kinds of questions are usually asking your opinion in some way, and this question is no exception. All the points listed are asking for your opinion, but most importantly, you must make it clear which type of music, traditional or international, you think is more important or useful. If indeed you do think one is more important, then you may think they are equally important. So now let's go to planning and organize your answer. So we have our plan. So always start with your introduction. Make sure that you give a general statement and give the plan of your essay. Body paragraph 1, here we outline the reasons why we need music. While body paragraph 2, you compare traditional music versus international music and specify which is more important, and then your conclusion. So overall, we have 4 body paragraphs. Now let's look at this sample introduction. Music exists in some form or another in every culture around the world, and it provides enjoyment to millions of people. However, some people are concerned that traditional music is being lost because of the popularity of international music. Now let's go to our body paragraph 1 reasons. So you have your linking words. Firstly, music is important as it provides enjoyment and pleasure in daily life. People listen to music to relax at home, to relieve the boredom of long journeys, and to dance to in the evening at clubs. Not only this, music is also an expression of culture, often being an essential part of religious ceremonies such as weddings and funerals or yearly festivals. It is also now common in educational development as children learn to play music at school. So here we have a variety of topic-specific vocabulary about music. So make sure you write around 3 to 5 sentences. Now we go to body paragraph to comparison. In considering which kind of music is the most important, international music is certainly useful to society because it can be argued that it helps us to understand and relate to other people, cultures, and countries as we all listen to the same songs. This has occurred as globalization means Western music is heard around the world. However, this mustn't be at the expense of traditional music. It should be a priority to preserve this since it teaches people about their history and helps society remember and retain their national and cultural identity. So here again, we have our reasons why international music is important. Then we have our conclusion. To conclude, I would argue that one type of music is not more important or useful than another. Traditional music is vital and should be preserved as it is part of a country's cultural identity. But both are needed as they provided enjoyment to people in different ways. So, in your conclusion, so have a linking word to conclude, to sum up, and then give your opinion. So, in this case, the opinion of the writer is that not one type of music is important. Both are important. So you can have two says for the conclusion. Welcome to the choosing the correct topic lesson. Now, if you correctly identify the topic of the IELTS essay question, you are in danger of getting a very low score. You could come down to a band 5 for task response. So, identifying the topic is one of the first things you need to do. So here we will learn and practice doing this. Now, how do I identify the topic? Remember, in IELTS writing, you are usually presented with some issue or problem that is currently affecting society, and you need to discuss it. So, you need to read the question carefully and identify what's the issue. You will normally only be looking for one or two keywords. Now let's look at the sample task. The crime rate among teenagers has increased dramatically in many countries. Discuss some possible reasons for this increase and suggest solutions. Now, you should have identified teenage crime as a topic. So here you have the crime rate among teenagers has increased dramatically in many countries. So crime and teenagers has been highlighted for you. Now, what if I identified crime as a topic? Your essay would be wrong if you wrote about crime generally. When you have a topic, it may require you to talk about a particular area, group, or people or place. In this case, the question specifically wants you to address the issue of teenage crime. When you identify the topic, always look carefully to see if it is being narrowed down to a particular area that you need to focus on. Welcome to how to identify the task lesson. Now, once you have identified the topic for your essay, you need to identify the task. And the task is the part of the question that tells you what you have to do to answer it. This is one of the most important things you will have to do when you analyze the essay question. Why? Because 25% of your grade for the essay is based on task response, how you have responded for the task. To grade your task response, the examiner will be looking to see if you have answered the question. If you have only partially answered the question, this will decrease your grade for this criterion. Let's look at this essay question. The crime rate among teenagers has increased dramatically in many countries. Discuss some possible reasons for this increase and suggest solutions. Now, we identified the topic for this question as teenage crime. The task or what you have to do is usually at the end of the prompt. As you can see, you are being told to discuss some possible reasons for this increase and suggest solutions. It is very common in Task 2 IELTS essay question to get asked to do two things. And this question is a good example of this. One, why teenage crime has increased, and two, ways to solve this problem. Now, you must discuss both those things to ensure you have fully answered the question, and you must write roughly equal amounts about each part. Doing any of the following things will reduce your score for task response and hence may reduce your overall score. So, only writing about reasons or only solutions. Two, writing most of your essay about reasons and only a small part on solutions or vice versa. Three, writing about the reasons and solutions for crime in general and not reasons for the teenage crime, which is a topic. Or four, writing about neither reasons nor solutions. So this is why it's important to spend some of the time at the beginning making sure you identify the task so that you know what you have to write about. So, a common mistake for students to rush at the beginning to start writing as they worried about not finishing and then write about the wrong thing. For example, when you have finished identifying the task, you will brainstorm your ideas. You may come up with reasons for an increase in crime, such as lack of parental supervision and boredom. However, I've seen some students come up with problems of teenage crime, such as more young people being put in prison and stress for their parents. Now, this particular task asks you to write about reasons, not problems, though being asked to write about problems and solutions is common. So, if you do this, you will not be answering the question. This comes from rushing and not taking enough time to identify the task properly. Now, let's look at other question types. The previous question was fairly easy, so to identify the task was hopefully not too difficult. Some questions, though, will take more thought in order to identify what you need to write about. So let's look at another example question. Advances in technology and automation have reduced the need for manual labor. Therefore, working hours should be reduced. To what extent do you agree? Again, look to the end of the prompt to identify the task. You have to say if you agree or disagree with working hours being reduced, or, in other words, automation machines taking over from some human duties. You must also say how much you agree or disagree to what extent. So let's assume you want to look at both sides of the issue. You therefore need to discuss the reasons why you agree and the reasons why you disagree, or put another way, the advantages of reducing working hours. And second, the disadvantages of reducing working hours. And of course, in the introduction or conclusion, you need to make it clear what your opinion is. If you do all of these things, then you will have answered all parts of the prompt. If you find more reasons to agree than disagree, then you can write more about this side of the argument or vice versa. Welcome to the substitution lesson. Now, this lesson shows you how you can use substitution in IELTS to increase your band score. If you look at the IELTS band descriptors, you'll see that substitution is referred to at band 6 and 7 for coherence and cohesion in task 1 and 2. When you say band 7, a range of cohesive devices, including reference and substitution, is used flexibly, but with some inaccuracies or some over-underuse. For band 6, the use of reference and substitution may lack flexibility or clarity and in some repetitions or errors. So you can see that's very important in relation to your writing and your final essay. Now, what is substitution? Substitution in English grammar is when a word, phrase, or clause in a sentence is replaced by a different word or phrase in order to avoid repeating the previously used word. You can use this method to improve the cohesion as well as the quality of your writing. By substituting a different word or phrase for something written earlier, you are summarizing the previous text, and as a consequence, you're linking the essay to different clauses or sentences. Furthermore, using substitution in IELTS helps you to avoid repetition and also stops you from relying too much on conjunctions, while, though, and, so, etc., and transitions. However, firstly, therefore, to make connections. So overall, the use of substitution in IELTS will increase the quality of your writing significantly. Now let's look at some examples of how substitution is used. Let's look at example 1. Parents should get punished with high fines if their children are involved in antisocial behavior at night. Introducing such a measure would ensure parents control their children. So we have in red such a measure referring to the high fines. Now let's look at example 2. Unemployment and poverty are reaching record levels due to the lockdown, facts that can no longer be ignored by governments who continue to use this tool against COVID-19. So, facts is a substitution which refers to the previous clause. Welcome to the IELTS speaking tone lesson. Now, when you do your speaking test, it is important that you get the speaking tone correct. In this lesson, we'll look at how linking phrases can affect the tone. You're basically having a conversation with someone, so you want to sound natural. Some candidates think they have to sound very formal and academic. You obviously do need some good vocabulary to get a higher score on the test, such as that from the academic word list. Used correctly, of course. However, language that you would hear naturally if you had a conversation with your friends is also as important and will get noticed by the examiner. Now, take a look at this question and then the answer by a candidate. When do you think it is acceptable to be late for appointments? You should always try to be on time. However, there are some occasions when it's okay to be late. Firstly, in my country, the traffic is terrible, so sometimes you cannot help but be late because of that. Furthermore, if you are very ill, this may be another reason that makes you late. You can't really help that. Moreover, if an emergency arises because of, for example, a problem with your child, you will need to take care of that first, of course. Now, what do you think is the problem with the speaking tone for this answer? Now, here you see in red the linking words, however, firstly, further, moreover. So they're too formal and they're more appropriate for the writing. So the problem with this response is the words linking the ideas or the transitions. It is not that they're wrong as such. In theory, they can be used as the meaning is clear, but they are very formal. They are suitable for an academic essay, but you will not often hear someone use these words when they are speaking with you. So if you use this, it will make what you say sound very forced and unnatural. So here is a way to sound more natural. So, when do you think it's acceptable to be late for appointments? Should always try to be on time. But having said that, there are some occasions when it's okay to be late. A particular problem in my country is the terrible traffic jams. So sometimes you cannot help but be late because of that. Also, if you're very ill for an unexpected reason, again, there's nothing you can do about that. Another good reason is if an emergency arises because of, for example, a problem with your child, you will need to take care of that first, of course. So as you can see, the ones in green, but having said that, a particular problem in my country, also another good reason. So this one sounds more conversational. So this is how you would sound more natural. Welcome to the Understanding the IELTS Speaking Test lesson. Now let's talk about the test format. For part one is around 4 to 5 minutes long, and in part one you have the introduction and questions on familiar topic areas such as work, study, hobbies, or holidays. Now part two is around 3 to 4 minutes, and it's a 2 minute speech on a familiar topic wherein you talk with an IELTS examiner. And then for part three, it's around 4 to 5 minutes long, and it's a two-way discussion on issues related to the topic in part two. So let's dive into part one first. So as we said, it's around 4 to 5 minutes long. Now, before the part one questions start, there is a brief introduction. The examiner will introduce him or herself, and you will need to tell the examiner your name and show your identification, such as a passport or ID card. Now the questions will then begin. The part of the IELTS speaking test is the easiest part. The examiner will ask you general questions about yourself. Common topics are about your home, family, job, studies, interests, and a range of similar familiar topics. Now the examiner will choose three topic areas and you'll have about 4 questions on each. So you have around 10 to 14 questions depending on how long you speak for on each. So here are some examples of questions that you will encounter in part one. Examples are, what job do you do? Why do you choose that particular job? What do you do every day? And what other work would you consider doing? Now let's go to part two. So it's around 3 to 4 minutes long. In the IELTS speaking part two, you will have to talk on a topic that the examiner gives you for 2 minutes. It is designed to test your ability to speak for an extended period without hesitation or repetition. You will be given a card that asks you to describe something. They are topics that you should have some experience of or know something about. You may, for example, be asked to describe a person you know, a place you've been to, or a possession you have, but there are many different topics, so you have to be prepared for any topic. On the card, there'll be 3 subpoints that you should cover when you are speaking. And you have 1 minute to prepare what you're going to say, and you'll be given a paper and pen, and if you want to take notes. So here is an example of a task card. Describe the type of clothes you prefer to wear. You should say what the clothes look like, when you prefer to wear them, where you like to buy them, and explain why you like wearing these clothes. So now we go to part 3. So it's around 4 to 5 minutes long. In the final part of the IELTS speaking test, the examiner will have a discussion with you about some issues that will be related to the topic that you talk about in part 2. Now, the questions in this part are of a more abstract nature and so are more difficult than the questions in part 1 and 2. It's a two-way discussion, but you will still be expected to do most of the speaking. So here are examples of questions that you will encounter in part 3. Is buying clothes a popular activity for teenagers in your country? How much money should parents spend on their children's clothes? What types of fashion do teenagers like to wear in your country? What influence has the fashion industry had in your country? Are the fashions of today different from those when your parents were young? What do you think will be the effects of the fashion industry in the next 10 years? Welcome to the Useful Interview Expressions lesson. Now, in this lesson, we will look at some useful interview expressions. You need to make sure that you have adequate vocabulary and phrases to explain your position in the speaking test. You may need to ask for clarifications if you don't understand something or for something to be repeated if it was said too fast for you. Now, it's also good if you have a variety of phrases to give your opinion. It's common in part 3 of the IELTS test, for example, to be given an opinion or view to say what you think about it. So you will need to say if you agree or disagree or partially agree. Or maybe you think it depends on the circumstances. Or you may need to give yourself some thinking time before you can ask a question. Knowing and practicing some useful phrases will help you in these tests. So here are some examples of interview expressions. When you want to say something another way, you can say, what I'm trying to say is, in other words, to put it another way, what I mean is, perhaps I should make that clearer by saying, and then when you're agreeing with an opinion, you can say, yes, I agree. That's my view exactly. I would tend to agree with that. I couldn't agree more. When you disagree with an opinion, you can say, no, I disagree. I'm afraid I disagree. I see things rather different myself. I wouldn't say that is necessarily true. I tend to disagree. I'm not so sure about that. When you're partially agreeing with opinion, you can say, I don't entirely agree. It is true that, however, that is partly true, but I agree with that to an extent, however. When you're getting asked an opinion by the examiner, you can say, what do you think? What is your view or opinion? What are your views on? How do you feel about? And when you're saying your opinion could vary according to the situation, you can say, that depends. I think it really depends. That depends on how you look at it. And when you're asking for clarification, this is only for part 3. Could you please explain what word means? Sorry, I don't understand the question. Could you explain? Sorry, I'm afraid I didn't understand the question. Sorry, can I just clarify what you mean? Are you asking me? And then say what you believe you have been asked. You can also ask for repetition. You can say, sorry, would you mind repeating the question? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat the question? And then this is when you want to sum up. So all in all, to sum up, to conclude. So when do I use these phrases? You can say something in another way. Like people use these phrases to further clarify what they have said. In other words, to make it clear exactly what they mean. So you're saying the same thing you have just said, but in a different way. Maybe you felt you did not explain something properly to the examiner, and you want better say it again, but differently, or you just want to emphasize your point. So here is how you do it. So the examiner might ask, some people think that children should not be allowed to watch anything they like on television because some programs can negatively affect their behavior. What do you think? So this is how you can answer. I tend to disagree. I think children should be given the freedom to decide what is right for them to watch and not be told by the parents what they can and cannot see. In other words, it's up to the child, not the parent. Another way to use these phrases is getting asked an opinion when you agree with opinion or disagree with opinion. So you may use these phrases if the examiner asks you for your opinion on a topic. So this is also the same question, but a different answer. I wouldn't say that it is necessarily true. Most children are mature enough and understand that TV is not real, so I don't believe that it causes them. I think children should be given the freedom to decide what is right for them and not be told by parents what they can and cannot see. Another is when you're partially agreeing with an opinion. You may not fully agree with the opinion and you wish to explain this further. So, same question but different answer. I don't entirely agree. It is true that some programs cause harm to children. For example, programs with very violent behavior, so parents must ensure children should watch these kinds of programs too much. However, there has to be a balance and they have to be given some responsibility to make their own decision too, and it's also possible for the parents to monitor their children's TV habits all the time. And then lastly, you can use it for saying your opinion could vary according to the situation. So it's common to say depends when this is the case. So same question, but different answer. I think it really depends on the way the child has been brought up. Some children are brought up well by their parents and they know what is right and wrong. I don't think watching some programs that have violence or similar things would affect that. Other children aren't given the care or attention they need by their parents who may have personal problems. Watching violence on TV may make them even worse, and they already have a bad behavior, so they probably do need to be monitored. Welcome to Speaking About Change in Part 3 lesson. Now, questions that will involve you speaking about change are common in Part 3 of the IELTS test. Therefore, you need to make sure that you have the right grammar and phrases to be able to do this. Often, you're asked to compare a situation now with the same situation in the past. Common time periods include 20 years, 30 years, when your parents were young, and when your parents were young. So this lesson will provide you with some useful grammar for speaking about change in the IELTS test and how to spot these types of questions. So examples are, how are the eating habits now in your country different from eating habits in the past? Are the types of leisure activities that are popular today the same as those that were popular when your parents were young? How have shopping habits changed over recent years? Have the types of transport people use changed much over the last few years? Now let's go to use to. One way of describing how things have changed is to use used to. And we use it to refer to facts or situations that were true in the past but are not true now. When the change occurred is not important. Example, Vietnam used to be a colony of France, but now it is independent. Jimmy Carter used to be the president of the United States, but now he isn't. This can, of course, be used to give personal information. I used to smoke, but I gave up 2 years ago. Mike used to be a detective in the CAD, but now he's a teacher. Now let's go to comparatives. In these types of questions, the function being tested is compare, so using comparatives is obviously a good way of answering the question and speaking about change. Example, 30 years ago, the streets were much quieter than now. I think that reading was much more popular in the past. Now, when talking about how things are different now, the present perfect is often used as well as the present simple. Example, the streets have become much noisier these days. Notice a specific time is not needed. Reading is much less popular than it was in the past. Now let's go to speculation. Particularly for some of the longer periods, you may not be sure exactly how things have changed, but it's all right to speculate. Would can be used for strong speculation. Example, I think it would have been harder for my grandfather to find about the international news because there was no radio or TV in his village. In the past, people would have traveled less often. When you're not sure, you can use other words like perhaps, possibly, might, may, etc. I'm not sure, but perhaps they might have studied less science 30 years ago. Possibly, in my father's day, people could have played more sport. Lastly, let's go to question types. Questions about changes tend to be phrased in ways like these. How do you think blank is different from 30 years ago? In what ways has blank changed from when your parents were young? Or how is blank different from 20 years ago? Of course, the examiner may choose to word the question in other ways. Welcome to the Extending Your Answer in Speaking Part 2. Now, here are some tips for the IELTS Speaking Part 2. In the IELTS Speaking Part 2, you will be given by a topic by the examiner and you have to speak for 2 minutes. The topic will be the one that the examiner chooses and you can't change it. There are always things that you have some experience of and be able to talk about. However, some students find it difficult to do so because you only have 1 minute to prepare what you're going to say. And you also might be very nervous having to speak for 2 minutes to someone. So here is an example question. Describe someone who has had an important influence on your life. You should say who the person is, how long you have known him or her, what qualities this person has, and explain why they have had such an influence on you. So here are some tips on how you can extend your response. So you can use the WH question. So like who, what, when, where, how, why. So when you prepare, write down other question prompts that are not on the list and think of things you can say about those as well. You need to stay on topic, but it's okay to talk about things that are not directly related to the question prompts. For example, when did you meet, or where did you meet? Next tip is to think of a story. You can also tell a story about the person, place, event, or thing you're discussing. So in your 1 minute, think of and note down a quick and preferably an interesting story to tell about the topic. You can tell the story anywhere in your IELTS speaking part 2 as long as it fits in. So here is a sample answer applying the WH questions. So the person I'm going to talk about today is my teacher from high school. So we have the who. Her name was Miss Chadwick, and she taught quite a few subjects at the school. She had been working there for quite a few years when I met her, I think. And then you have the where. We met for the first time in my English class. And then more about the who. I remember this well because she was quite young compared to most of the other teachers in the school, so I was surprised that she was a teacher. In fact, she looked more like she could be one of the older students. Then you have the how long. So I met her when I was 15, and that was 10 years ago. I don't actually know her anymore as we lost contact soon after I left school, but I still remember her very well for several reasons. And then you have the what qualities. Firstly, she was very kind. She always treated all the students very well in the class, and I can't remember her ever shouting at anyone. Also, she had a really good sense of humor. She would make jokes in the class, which most of the other teachers never did. The other teachers were very serious all the time, and she made the classes a lot of fun and very interesting, something that I think is very neat. Otherwise, you start to get bored. Oh, and also she explained things very clearly. Often teachers are not able to do this in a way that they can understand, especially when it's complicated subject. Then you have, so those are the qualities that she had. The why such an influence? The reason she had such an important influence on me is because I was quite a shy person at school and not very confident. But she helped me to change this. And then you have your story. Each year there was a school play that I would be held in front of all the parents. And that year when I was 15, Miss Chadwick was organizing and directing the play. I really didn't want to be in it because I was so shy. But Miss Chadwick insisted that I take one of the roles, and it was one of the main roles, which meant that I would have to do a lot of speaking. I was so nervous. Anyway, I went and did it, and on the night I did really well and really enjoyed it, and that boosted my confidence. And this has helped me to this day. So my teacher, Miss Chadwick, is a person who has influenced my life, and I will never forget. Welcome to the Improving Your Response in Part 1 lesson. Now, in part 1 of the test, you are asked general questions about yourself. You'll be asked about 12 questions in part 1 of the test, and these will be taken from 3 different sets of topics which the examiner will choose. For example, you could be asked about your hometown, your favorite holiday destination, or what kind of books you like to read. So you have about 4 questions on each of this. So here are some speaking tips on how you can improve your responses. First, stay on topic. Listen carefully to the question and make sure you are answering it. Don't talk about something completely different just so you can talk for longer. Second, extend your answers. Give reasons for your answers. This can be a useful way to extend your responses. Always explain why you have given the answer that you have. And then don't speak excessively. Extend your answers, but don't go on too much. This will only mean the examiner will have to keep interrupting you to move on to the next question. And lastly, be honest but positive. Try to remain upbeat even if you're saying you don't do things or don't enjoy things you're being asked about. You can always put a positive slant on your answers. Welcome to talking about hypothetical situations in IELTS Speaking Part 2. Now, sometimes in part 2 of the speaking test, you are asked to describe things that involve a hypothetical situation. If something is hypothetical, then it is an unreal situation in the future. It's just an idea or imagine. Now, the grammar for this is connected to conditional type 2 if clauses. Now, take a look at this. So the question is, if you won the lottery, what would you do? So the answer is, I'd buy a large house in the countryside. Of course, the person has not won the lottery, so it's just an imagined or unreal situation. In the if part of the clause, you'll notice that the past simple one is used, even though the imagined future is being referred to. Would is used in the second part. Now, for the IELTS task card, you'll just be seeing the would part. So take a look at this sample task 2 question. Describe an interesting job you would like to have. You should say what the job is, who normally does this job, what skills are needed for the job, and explain why you would like this job. So when you talk about a hypothetical situation, you need to make sure that you're using the correct grammar. Remember that I would is usually shortened to I'd when we are speaking. So here is a sample response. So the ones in red are the I would part. I'm going to talk about a job I'd like to have. Okay, if I could choose any job, it would be an air hostess. They are the people who take care of customers who are traveling on planes, serving the food, making sure the travelers board and depart the plane safely, and taking care of any other issues. This type of job can be done by men or women, but there are usually certain requirements. For instance, you have to be at least 19 years old in most cases when you first apply, and usually a certain height, not too small. Also, your height needs to be in proportion to your height. So in other words, not overweight, unfortunately. They also prefer people who are younger, so not just anyone can do it. Those who do the job usually want to travel as much as they can to see the world, or maybe to make money, as in some developing countries it is a lot better paid than many other jobs. Regarding the skills, one of the most important things to be is outgoing. I think you need to be very confident and happy to chat with anyone. You also need to be patient, as I'm sure you can sometimes get passengers who complain but still have to continue to be nice to them. For qualifications, you have to have good GSC marks. I think that is it. The reason that I like a job like this is because I really like to see the rest of the world and I like to meet lots of new people from different cultures and countries. It's actually something I wanted to do for a very long time since I was young, which I know so much about the requirements. I'm quite a confident person and very outgoing, so I think I have all the qualities that are needed for such a job. If I was given the chance to do this job in the future, I'd be very happy. It's my dream, so hopefully one day it will come true. So this is how you apply the hypothetical situations in speaking part 2. Let's talk about how to express opinions in IELTS speaking. Now, expressing opinions or giving your thoughts is an important part of the IELTS speaking test, especially in part 3 when you have a two-way discussion with the examiner. You also need to justify your opinion or explain why you have that opinion. By justifying your opinion, you will be extending your response and making sure you're having a proper discussion with the examiner, which you need to do in part 3. In this lesson, we'll look at some ways how you can express your opinions and justify them. And to do this, we usually use adverbial phrases at the start of the sentence. Now, let's talk about some ways of expressing opinions or saying what you think about a topic. So, for example, the expression clearly or obviously, it means easy to understand or see. Example, clearly the economy is not going to improve this year. Or you can use personally, which means showing that it is your opinion. You can say, personally, I don't think the legal drinking age should be reduced. Others may disagree. Or you can use generally, which means usually or in most situations. Example, generally, the trains are a lot more reliable than the buses in my country. And next, we have surprisingly, which means unexpectedly or in a way that is unusual. Example, surprisingly, the government prohibited smoking in all public places last year. I never thought this would happen. And then we have inevitably, which means in a way that cannot be avoided. Example, I didn't study much. Inevitably, I didn't get the score I needed. And we can also use predictably, which means as expected. Example, predictably, problems are now occurring in the city because of overpopulation. Frankly means to be honest and direct. Frankly, I wish I'd waited before taking the IELTS test as I'm not ready. And then lastly, we have sadly, regrettably, or unfortunately means unhappy, sad, or sorry about something. Regrettably, my family could never return to their country because of the Civil War. And then after expressing your opinions, here are some ways that you can justify them. So you can use across one sentence, like subject verb as the government has invested a lot of money into the system because the government has, since the government has, due to the fact that the government has. So you can also have a noun phrase like generally the trains are a lot more reliable than the buses in my country. So you can use because of the government's investment of money into the system or due to the government's investment of, as a result of the government's investment of, or as a consequence of the government's investment of. Or it could be across two sentences. So you have the same sentence. Generally, the trains are a lot more reliable than the buses in my country. So you have the subject verb. The reason for this is that the government, or this is because the government has, this is due to the fact that the government has, or it could be a noun phrase. This is due to the government's investment of, this is because of the government's investment of, this is a result of the government's investment of, and lastly, this is a consequence of the government's investment of. Let's talk about speaking about personal experiences. Now, this lesson is about using personal experiences in part 3 of the IELTS speaking test. Students often make a mistake in part 3 of the IELTS test as they talk only about their personal experiences, and this is usually the sign of a weaker candidate. Now, parts 1 and 2 of the speaking test are very much about you. In part 1, they ask questions about anything from your studies to your favorite types of clothes. In part 2, you have to talk for 2 minutes about such things as a place you've been to or someone you know. However, part 3 is not so much about you. It's about topics more generally and how they affect everyone rather than just you personally. Now, here are some example questions from part 3 of the speaking test on a variety of topics. So, for the food, you have described the type of food that people eat in your country. How are the eating habits now in your country different with those in the past? How healthy is your country's food? Education, what do you think about the way languages are taught in schools in your country? How do you think a poor university education can affect career success? What changes do you think will happen in the classroom in the near future? For leisure, why are some activities more popular than others? How do the types of leisure activities popular now different from those popular when your parents were young? And what types of leisure activities may become more popular in the future? Now, if you look carefully at the questions, you will see that they are not about you. They are about people generally in your country or around the world. A common mistake for some students is that they make the topic only or mostly about themselves or people they know rather than talking more generally. So, here are some examples of good and bad answers to the two of the above questions. So, what's wrong with the bad answers? So, describe the type of food that people eat in your country. I might try some other dishes occasionally, such as Korean food, as I like that, but I always tend to eat Japanese food. At home, my mom will always make Japanese food too. My brother will eat much more Western food than I do, but he would go out to buy this rather than getting at home. So this one is a bad answer because it only talks about personal experience. Now let's look at a good answer. There are a lot of different types of food in Japan if you're big in cities like Tokyo, such fast food outlets, Italian restaurants, Korean food, and of course a lot of Japanese restaurants. But most people tend to eat Japanese food, even in these big cities when there are other choices, but especially in smaller towns and villages. So this one is good because it talks about general aspects of food in country. Now, let's go to an example two. What do you think about the way languages are taught in schools in your country? Bad answer. In my school, we learned English and it was taught really badly. I think it's firstly because the teachers themselves were not native English people and their English was not perfect. So they taught us to say some things incorrectly, and also they could not always say things clearly, so we could not learn good pronunciation of them. So here it started already with the personal experience, so which is not good. So let's look at the good answer. In most schools in my country, English is the main language taught. I think it's actually taught quite badly because many of the teachers are not native English teachers. A good example is my school. The teachers themselves were nearly all Korean, not native English people, and their English was not perfect. So they taught us to say some things incorrectly, and also they could not always say things clearly, so we could not learn good pronunciation of them. So the ones in red, it's okay to talk about personal experience, but always start with a general example first. So it's okay to talk about your own experiences, but this should just support general ideas about society. The whole answer should not just be about your experience. Now, here are more examples, some good answers that are supported with personal experience, which are in red. How do you think a poor university education can affect career success? I don't think that it does have to affect it because many people manage to become successful without a higher education. It's more down to your confidence and motivation than anything else. For example, I've got two brothers. The older one went to university, but the most successful of the two is actually my younger brother, who started working straight after school. He is now the head of one of the biggest companies in Italy, and this was down to his drive and his enthusiasm in his work and his ability to get on with people well. Next, how healthy is your country's food? It's not really that healthy, I would say. A lot of Thai food is cooked in fat and oil, especially the street food, which is often cooked in fat that is reused many times. MSG is also added a lot. Also, there are now a lot of fast food restaurants that people eat at because it's convenient. My younger cousin already has diabetes and is only 23, and I'm sure that is due to diet. And my father has a bad heart, which is from too much cholesterol, which I think has also been caused by the food. So, to sum up in part three of the speaking, make sure that you're talking generally rather than about personal experience. However, you can use personal experience, but this should just be used to illustrate your general points. Welcome to talking about the future lesson. Now, let's talk about how to use will and going to discuss the future. Usually, in part three of the speaking test, you'll be asked to talk about the future in at least one of the questions. Some of the questions in part one may also be about the future. Will and going to are popular words to do this, so we will look at them, but there are some other ways too. Now, it's important to notice when a question is about the future, so you can make sure that your response is also using a future tense. So here are example asked questions about the future. Do you think any new national celebrations will come into being in the future? Second, how do you think the internet will change people's buying habits in the future? And third, do you think it will be more or less important to have a good education in the future? Now, here is an explanation of will and going to and some other useful structures for discussing the future. Now, for will, there are various uses of will, but in IELTS Part 3, we can use it when we want to talk about future events that we believe are certain. Will is followed by verb 1 or the infinitive. Example, education will be more important in the future because as populations increase, there will be greater competition for jobs. Now, if you use will on its own, this means you believe in what you're saying 100%, or you have 100% evidence to back up your claim. You can add in a word like definitely if as well if you want to emphasize your certainty even more. Example, education will definitely be more important in the future because as population increase, there will be greater competition for jobs. Now, if you're less certain, which is often the case as we usually don't have evidence with us, then we use words such as maybe, perhaps, possibly, probably, and likely. Example, education will probably be more important in the future because as population increase, there will be greater competition for jobs. Now let's go to going to. Will and going to are used in similar ways. We can use going to talk about the plan we have, but in the IELTS test part 3, we usually use it when we are making a prediction based on evidence we know of, often from what we can see in front of us. Going to is followed by verb 1 or the infinitive. Example, the sky is very black, the evidence we can see. I think it's going to rain, not an IELTS example. The internet is getting much easier to use and safer, which is the evidence, so I think it's going to be very popular for buying clothes in the future. The climate is going to become warmer and warmer because the government is not doing enough to prevent global warming. Now, when do you use will or going to? Will is more common for giving predictions about future events, so if you're unsure of the difference between them, just use will. However, we often use will and going to interchangeably. For example, in the sentence above, we can swap them without affecting the meaning. Example, the climate will or is going to become warmer and warmer because the government is not doing enough to prevent global warming. Education will probably or is probably going to be more important in the future because as populations increase, there will be greater competition for jobs. Now, there are other choices, like you can use modal verbs. In addition to will and going to, another way to talk about the future is to use modal verbs such as may and might. Again, these are used when you're not certain about something. They have the same meaning. Example, I think education may become more important in the future, but it really depends on what happens to the job market. The climate might get cooler in the future if we manage to restrict carbon emissions. We can also use the present continuous. So this also used to talk about the future. It's often used to when we want to talk about what has been arranged for the future, so it may be less common for part 3 and more common for part 1, but still possible for some things you may want to say. For example, our president is meeting the president of the USA next year, so hopefully they will discuss the problems of our country. So here is an example of how to use will and going to. How do you think the internet will change people's buying habits in the future? Buying from the internet is becoming more and more popular. For example, we've seen many bookshops close down because people can buy online at cheaper prices from sites such as Amazon. It makes life much easier if products can be delivered direct to our door, especially with our busy modern lifestyles. I think this will only increase in the future as more people feel safe to buy online and online shops. It is easier to purchase this way. Also, I think our lives are only going to become busier, so more people will choose to shop this way. Welcome to the types of speaking questions for part 1. Now, you can get various types of speaking questions for IELTS, so it's important to understand how to reply to them properly. This lesson is particularly important if you're at the lower level of English, as those with weaker speaking skills often show that they have misunderstood the question when they give the answer. Now, let's talk about misunderstanding the question. Giving the wrong answer could also come from not concentrating properly. This could be due to nerves, so you miss exactly what the examiner has asked, so you have to listen carefully. Take a look at this example question. How important do you think it is to learn English language? The candidate's reply is, oh, I really like learning English. I think it will really help with my career. Now, this is a wrong answer because it doesn't exactly answer the question. So here should be the kinds of answer. You can answer, it's very important because it's extremely important. It's fairly important because it's quite important because I don't think it's very important because. So these are the kinds of answers that would be expected. So in this case, it's an adverb degree that would be expected as they commonly follow have questions that can ask for an opinion about something. So that is not to say there are not other possibilities, but this directly answers the question, unlike the other response, which was incorrect. So here are some examples of types of speaking questions for IELTS. Example, how important is having breakfast to you? Not very important, really. I often miss it as I never feel that hungry when I first wake up. Lunch is often the first meal of the day for me. Second, would you rather eat out or eat at home? I prefer to eat as I like home cooked food. You know for sure what is in the ingredients. Whereas at a restaurant, you can never be sure of what's in the food and whether it is healthy or not. Next, how often do you eat out? About once or twice a week. Mostly, I eat in because I get back from work late and I don't have time to get to a restaurant. What kind of restaurants do you like to go to if you do eat out? Usually, it's a small family-run places. They have a better atmosphere than those big chains, and often the price is more reasonable too. You can also get to know the owner, which is good. Next, when did you last go to a restaurant? Oh, it was probably about a week ago, last weekend. I went to a place called Chino's down the road from me. It does great Italian food. Where is the best place to shop for groceries? I think the supermarkets are good to get cheap things, such as the everyday items like tin food and toiletries, but local stores are better because the meat and vegetables are always fresh. How do you get to the shops when you go for food? I usually go by car, but occasionally by bike if the weather is okay and I don't need to buy too much. The car can obviously be better if it's a weekly shopping and you need to purchase a lot. Why do you think there's a problem with obesity in many countries? I think it's principally to do with diet and time. People don't have a lot of time, so they eat food. This lack of time also means that people don't do enough exercise. Lastly, who should be dealing with obesity? The government should do something, such as making producers label food packaging clearly, but individuals also have to take responsibility for their own weight and lifestyle. Welcome to the subject-verb agreement lesson. Now, it is important to understand subject-verb agreement for IELTS. If you're making errors with this in your writing or speaking, it will be very noticeable as it is a very basic error. For example, take a look at this paragraph, which is errors with subject-verb agreement. Some people argue that leaving people in prison for a long time mean that they will mix with other criminals and so their character will not improve. The alternative are community service. This gives an offender the opportunity to give something positive back to society and so it may improve their character. Also, the government could focus its resources on the causes of crime, which would lead to less crime in the future. So let's talk about the basic rules. So for a singular third person, he, she, it, in the present tense, the verb must have an S ending. So for the singular, we say I take. Plural, we use we take. Singular, you take, also the same, you take. Singular, he, she, it takes. If it's plural, we use they take. So example, he takes the bus to work every morning. So we have he is singular, so that's why we use takes. Plural, his family take the train, so we use take because his family is plural. Now let's talk about different formations. So different formations are used for the irregular verb to be, but an S is still used for the third person singular. So we have I am, and then for the plural, we have we are. And then for the singular and plural is the same for you are. And then he, she, it is. And then for the plural, we use they are. For the past, singular is I was. The plural is we were. And then singular and plural is the same. You were, you were. And then he, she, it was. While plural is they were. So example sentence, he was on the bus by 9 a.m. While plural, his children were on the train by 9:30 a.m. However, these are just the basic rules. There are other things that are important to understand to ensure you are using subject-verb agreement correctly in all contexts and some things that are confusing. So we'll look at some of these now. First, let's go to there is and there are. When you use there is and there is never the subject. The subject is the word that comes after the verb. Therefore, you need to look at that word to decide if the verb is singular or plural. Example, there are several reasons why we must tackle the problem of global warming. There is one main reason we must tackle global warming. What sometimes confuses people is when there are several nouns after the verb, it's common to make the mistake of using a plural verb. In fact, the verb should be around only the first noun. Now take a look at this simple example. There is a pen, some pencils, and a rubber on the table. There are pens, one pencil, and some rubbers on the table. In each of these examples, you just need to look at the first noun to decide if the subject is singular or plural. So you can ignore the ones after this. Next, let's go to separated subject. Another common mistake is when the subject is separated from the verb by a prepositional phrase, relative clause, or reduced relative clause. A mistake is to make the verb agree with the last noun in a phrase or clause rather than the subject of the sentence. So incorrect sentence, improving the situation of people in cities are very important. The correct way is improving the situation of people in cities is very important. It should not agree with cities, as this is part of the prepositional phrase. Now, here are some more examples of correct subject-verb agreement. The phrase or clause that should be ignored for purposes of agreement is in brackets. Obesity in children is a growing concern. The decision made by the country's leaders after numerous meetings was definitely the right one. And then next, the new roads which the government has built have not reduced congestion. Next, let's go to expressions of quantity. Another difficult area with subject-verb agreement is dealing with quantities. When a quantity word is followed by a prepositional phrase, it can follow the rules above. Example, the verb agrees with the subject, the quantity. Example are, one of the new teachers is from India. None of the candidates is likely to get my vote. In spoken English, the plural form is commonly used, like are likely. 5 of my friends are coming with me on holiday. However, for some quantity phrase, you don't need to refer to the noun in the prepositional phrase to decide if the verb is singular or plural. Example, we have a lot of. For singular, a lot of the meat is fresh, while the plural, a lot of the vegetables are organic. Now, for singular, all of the meat is fresh, while in the plural, all of the vegetables are organic. And then you just replace some of the meat is fresh for singular, some of the vegetables are organic for plural. And then if you use the fraction, 1/2 or third of is 1/2 of the room is empty, while for plural, 1/3 of the cars on the road use unleaded fuel. Next, let's go to neither and either. With these phrases, the verb must agree with the noun that is closest to the verb. So neither the child nor her parents are at school. So are, because the nearest noun is parents. Neither the parents nor their child is at the school. Is, we use is because child is the nearest noun. Either my brother or my sisters usually help me. Here, sisters is the one closest to help. And lastly, either my sisters or my brother usually helps me because brother is the nearest to the verb. Now we go to indefinite pronouns as subjects. A common mistake is made in subject-verb agreement with indefinite pronouns, as people often assume they must take a plural verb because they refer to more than one thing. So here are some common examples of indefinite pronouns. So you have everyone, everybody, everything. So here, people mistake everyone, everybody, everything. They think it's the same as all. But when you say everyone, everybody, everything, you mean each person, each thing. And then we also have someone, somebody, something. And then anyone, anybody, anything. And then no one, nobody, nothing. So here is how we apply the subject-verb agreement rule. Everybody seems to be nervous about the exam. Something needs to be done about the increasing rate of crime. According to the news, nobody is directly responsible for the problems. Now we go to modal verbs. Modal verbs are always followed by the bare infinitive. So in this case, the third person singular no longer takes a singular verb. So it's incorrect to say he will takes the bus to work. The correct way is he will take the bus to work. And it's wrong to say it would seem that she is unwell. The correct way would be it would seem that she is unwell. Lastly, we go to gerunds. What are gerunds? These are verbs that function as nouns by adding ing. They always take a singular subject. Remember to look at the gerund, not the noun that may come between the gerund and the verb. Example, feeding the poor in developing countries is what most aid is used for. Running my businesses take up most of my time. And lastly, typing is a skill that I have not yet mastered. Welcome to the parallel structure lesson. Now, what is parallel structure? Parallel structure is when you balance the grammatical structures of words, clauses, sentences, or phrases in your writing. They are important for any kind of writing and speaking in order to maintain coherence. In this particular lesson, we'll look at parallel words and phrases. Now, we make words or phrases parallel when we are writing things in the list of series, and each word must have the same grammatical form. Now, for words, nouns are balanced with nouns, adjectives with adjectives, verbs with verbs, gerunds with gerunds, and so on. Now, for phrases, prepositional phrases are balanced with prepositional phrases, infinitive phrases with infinitive phrases, and gerund phrases with gerund phrases. Now, the coordinating conjunction and is usually used to connect the parallel items, but other coordinating conjunctions such as or and nor may be used. Now, correlative conjunctions such as both and, neither nor, and whether or are also used as connectors. Now, here are examples of parallel structure. So we have first the infinitives and gerunds. For example, she wants to go to England and studying at the London School of Economics is wrong. So how do we correct it? The correct way is she wants to go to England and study at the London Schools of Economics. So the first sentence is wrong because the first item in the list is to go, which is an infinitive, but the second item, studying, is a gerund. In order to correct it, studying has to be changed to an infinitive. Now let's go to adjectives. John ensured that he gave his 2-minute talk confidently, effectively, and persuasively. Is wrong. And this is the correct one. John ensured that he gave his 2-minute talk confidently, effectively, and persuasively. So the first sentence is incorrect as the last item in the series, persuasive, is an adjective, whereas the first two items are adverbs. The second sentence has been corrected by changing persuasive to the adverb persuasively. Now, let's look at this adjective. The room was comfortable, airy, and it was not dirty is wrong. So how do we correct it? The room was comfortable, airy, and clean. So the first sentence is correct since the first two items in the series, comfortable and airy, are adjectives. Whereas the last item, it was not dirty, contains a verb. The second sentence has been corrected by changing it was not dirty to the adjective clean. Now let's go to the infinitive phrases. I can't decide whether to take a bus or riding my bicycle to work is wrong. So the correct sentence is I can't decide whether to take a bus or to ride my bicycle to work. So the first sentence is wrong because an infinitive and gerund phrases have been mixed together. The second is correct because they are both infinitive phrases. Now, here are some examples of file structure in terms of prepositional phrases. He climbed the rock, up the wall, and onto the roof is wrong. The correct sentence is he climbed over the rock, up the wall, and onto the roof. So the first sentence is not parallel since the first word, the rock, does not have a preposition. But the next two words in the list have, it can be corrected by placing the correct preposition over before climb. Welcome to the Using Modal Verbs in IELTS lesson. Now, how to use modal verbs in IELTS. So this IELTS lesson is about modal verbs and how they can be used to improve your writing. Though this is also relevant to speaking. You're likely to use these a lot in your essay writing for task 2, particularly if you're writing an essay which needs to give solutions to a problem. They're also important to help in clarifying the certainty with which you are making a point, which is important for your writing. So the examiner will expect you to be competent in using this to award you a higher band score. Now, what are modal verbs? Modal verbs are used commonly in English to add further information to the main verb. They are added to a sentence to show things such as possibility, ability, regret, or necessity. And they are auxiliary or helping verbs, which means they cannot be used on their own, but must be used with the main verb. So here are examples of modal verbs. You can have may, might, can, could, shall, should, will, would, or must. And the main verb is go. So examples are she can swim, can she swim, she cannot swim. We also have what we call semi-modal verbs like ought, need, and have. And the infinitive that we use is to go. Examples are she has to go, does she have to go, she doesn't have to go. Now, how are they used? As you can see from the table, these verbs are used with the main verb and are followed by the bare infinitive. Bare means no to. The examples are ought, need, and have, which are followed by the infinitive with to. Now, let's talk about common use in the IELTS task 2. So, three important functions of modal verbs when you're writing or speaking for IELTS are first, discussing degrees of certainty, number two, making suggestions, and third would be hypothetical situations. So, let's talk about degrees of certainty. Will, may, might, and could are common to make logical deductions about the situation or the future, which you often need to do in task 2. So here, let's look at three sentences. Children with no father as a role model will become criminals, which is 100% true. Children with no father as a role model may become criminals, which is possible. And children with no father as a role model could become criminals, which is possible. Now, which of the sentences do you think is incorrect? Hopefully, you work out that the first one is wrong. This is a common mistake to see in IELTS essay. The grammar is okay, but it's not possible to conclude that all children with no father as a role model will become criminals. So be careful when you're making assessments in this way. Will is 100% going to happen, so avoid using it to make generalizations about everybody, everything, unless you know it's 100% true. And there are other ways to make it less certain, like will possibly. And when you're writing IELTS essays, it's unusual that you will have evidence that you can use to show 100% what you're saying is true. So the second two sentences is better in this situation. Now let's go to number two suggestion. Must, should, ought to, have to, and could are often used to make suggestions for solving a problem. It is common in task 2 to get a question asking you to discuss a problem and suggest solutions. Example are governments must, have to, need to take action to tackle global warming. So this is strong obligation. Or it could be parents should ought to stop their children watching too much television, which is a strong suggestion. Individuals could recycle more is more of a possibility. Lastly, we have hypothetical situations. It's common to use would and could to discuss hypothetical situations. If something is hypothetical, this means in effect it has not happened. You're discussing an unreal situation in the future or imagining something. For example, if the government spent more money on hospitals, people would be healthier. It is something that's not happened and you don't know if it will. Welcome to the collocation in the IELTS test lesson. Now, this refers to words, often two or three, that are commonly placed together. There may be grammatical reasons for this, but there may not be. It may be that through long-term usage, it just sounds correct. It is one of the most important things to understand and practice when you learn the English language. Here is an example of some common verb-noun combinations to illustrate. To make the bed, to make the money, to make a noise, to catch a cold, to catch a bus, to catch a fish, to come late, to come on time, to come to a decision, to do homework, do the shopping, to do nothing. You can say to the bed, as these words do not collocate together. Now, why are they important for IELTS? The examiner will be judging you on this. For example, here's what the IELTS exam public band descriptors say for an IELTS Band 7 for lexis or vocabulary. Uses less common lexical items with some awareness of style and collocation. Now, so to achieve Band 7 this criteria, Not only do you need to be using some less common words, you also need to show to some extent that you know what other words these less common words are usually used with. However, this is important for any band. If you have a broad grasp of them, you will have a negative impact on your writing and your speaking. Now, how do I learn them? They're not something you can really sit down and say, okay, I'm going to learn collocation today. The important thing is that when you learn a new word, you learn what words are commonly used in combination with it. This is a common approach in English language course books. Let's take a simple example. Let's say you're fairly new to English and you're learning the word to have. You may be presented with these phrases in your course book to help you learn the word have lunch, have a bath, have a rest, have a meeting, have a haircut, have a good time, have a relationship, have a holiday, have a sympathy. And then you are not just learning the word have, you are learning chunks of language. You're also learning words that are usually used with the word have. Learning words this way is much more effective than learning words in isolation. If you learn words on their own, you're sure to make mistakes when you try to use them in sentences. Here are some more complex examples using the word interest to show the types of collocation you may find for a word. So you have adjective plus interest, like considerable interest, deep interest, great interest, historical interest, long-term interest, musical interest, vested interest, financial interest, business interest. So you can say has a vested interest in the future of the business. I have varied musical interests. I like jazz, pop, classical, and reggae. Adverb plus interest, you can say greatly interested, deeply interested, particularly interested, really interested, very interested, quite interested. Example, he's deeply interested in religion. I'm very interested in studying abroad. You can also have noun plus interest, like interest rate, interest payment, interest charge, interest group. Example, there are political interest groups in my country that want to change the constitution. You can also have preposition plus interest, like out of interest, for interest, of interest. I had never heard of the film before, but I went to see it out of interest. Interest plus preposition, like interest among, interest from, interest in. The speech generated interest from many people. You could also have verb plus interest, like take an interest, have an interest, show an interest, lose interest, attract interest, generate interest, spark interest, be of interest, maintain interest, share an interest, pay interest. Example, I started learning to play the guitar, but I lost interest very quickly. My friends and I share many interests, so we get along very well. So as you can see, there are many words that have commonly used with interest in different contexts. It's hard to use the wrong words with it. This will be very noticeable. If you say this, for example, it will be very obvious to the examiner that it's wrong. I'm completely interested on modern art. Completely does not collocate with interest in this sentence, nor does it. It could instead be said like this. I'm particularly interested in modern art. Someone using this sense like this constantly, of course, would achieve a high band score for the Lexis because they are demonstrating a good understanding of which words should go together. Another way to improve your knowledge of what words collocate in reading is reading. The more you read, the more you will notice which words commonly go together. Welcome you using idioms in the IELTS test lesson. Now, what are idioms? They are phrases, words, or expressions that do not have the same meaning as the actual words used in a phrase. In other words, their meaning cannot be taken literally. For example, we can say, I'm over the moon that I got a band 7.5 in IELTS. Obviously, you can't take the words over the moon literally. It does not mean that the person is standing over the moon. The phrase is used when someone wants to express that they are incredibly happy about something that has happened. There are also expressions that are grammatically unusual. For example, so far so good. This means that up until this point in time, things are going well. Now, how are they related to IELTS? This is one of the criteria for achieving a Band 7 in IELTS speaking for lexical resource or vocabulary. Uses some less common and idiomatic vocabulary. So this means that the exam will be trained to spot if you use this type of vocabulary. They're much less common in formal or academic writing, so they are not mentioned in the writing band descriptors. So forget about them for your writing, though they can be used in an informal letter for general training. Should I learn idioms for the IELTS speaking test? They should be quite low down in your priorities when you're preparing for the IELTS test. Just because they are at band 7 does not mean you will not get a 7 for lexical resource if you don't use them. And if you do use some, this doesn't automatically mean you'll get 7 for lexical resource. For example, if your general use of lex throughout the test tends to be at band 6 level, the exam will not give you a 7 just because you fit over the moon in somewhere. Now, using idioms at the right time and in the right context is also quite difficult to learn. Native speakers use them very naturally and exactly in the right context because they've been brought up with language and they don't have to think about it. Imagine you learn the phrase over the moon for the test. You now have to hope the examiner asks you a question where you could fit it in. That could be unlikely, and if you're nervous, it's just something you want to worry about. If you use them unnatural because you're trying to fit them in a test, it will probably be noticeable. You need to be at a level where you can use them fairly naturally. Those who can use them well in the test have not usually studied a book and learned them, but have picked them up through experience, maybe from some time abroad or just from being quite a good speaker of English. However, that is not to say you shouldn't use them, but it depends on your situation. If you're around a band 5.5 level or lower, I would say forget about them for now. At least make them a lower priority. You have much more important things to worry about. You need to work on improving your general vocabulary. For example, try practicing the academic word lists and collocations and improving your fluency and grammar. If you're at a higher level and you have time, you may want to start thinking about what you can do to make yourself just that bit better, and gradually improving your knowledge of these types of expressions and phrases can help you with this. So now let's talk about common idioms. Learning common idioms first is the best way to begin building up your knowledge of these types of words and expressions. So here are some of the most common phrases. Make sure that you check that you know exactly what idioms are and when to use them before you start practicing them. These common idioms are for speaking rather than for writing. So here we have common idiom and their definition. It cost me an arm and a leg to take my trip to Australia, which means very expensive. I was over the moon when he asked me to marry him, which means extremely pleased or happy. You are taking your IELTS test next week? Aren't you jumping the gun? You've only just started studying, which means doing or starting something too early. He comes around to see me once in a blue moon, which means happening very rarely. He's got a chip on his shoulder, which means feeling inferior or having a grievance about something. I reckon getting a band 7 IELTS will be a piece of cake. I'm very good at English, which means very easy. The money sent by Comic Relief to help poverty in Africa is just a drop in the ocean. They need far more than this, which means a very small part of something much bigger. Getting a low score the first time I took IELTS was a blessing in disguise. It forced me to study extremely hard, so I got a much better score the next time, which means something positive that isn't recognized until later. We have to actually do something about global warming. Actions speak louder than words, which means it's better to actually do something rather than just talking about it. I bumped into Jenny in town the other day. It's a small world, which means meeting someone you would not have expected to. Welcome to the lesson on using phrasal verbs in IELTS. Now, phrasal verbs can be important for us as someone who can use them naturally shows that they have a good command of the English language. They can be used in speaking, but also in IELTS letter writing, though this is mostly in informal letters. You may also want to be able to recognize them if someone else uses them in their writing or speaking. Otherwise, you may misunderstand what they're saying, and knowing them will help with listening and reading as well. Now, what are phrasal verbs? Phrasal verbs are verbs plus a preposition or an adverb or followed by two. When these two words are put together, they have a different meaning to what each word means on its own. Here's an example. I can't put up with your rudeness anymore. You probably know that the word put means to place something somewhere, such as I put the book on the table, and the word up means to in or towards a higher position. However, when these words are put together, the meaning completely changes. So, to put up with means to accept someone or something unpleasant in a patient way. Now, what are the difficulties that you'll encounter with phrasal verbs? It's not this straightforward though. Some phrasal verbs must take an object, and some can be put either side of the object. For example, look at this illustration with the phrasal verb let down. O- Means disappointed. I felt let down by my friend. Or my friend really let me down. Another difficulty is that they are verbs, which obviously means they take a tense and will change according to whether it's past, present, or future. Look at this example with breakup, which means to end a relationship. I broke up with my girlfriend last week, so this is in the past. I hope my girlfriend does not break up with me, which is present. I've broken up with my girlfriend, which is present perfect. I think I'm going to break up with my girlfriend, which is in the future. And also, some have more than one meaning. For example, I've fallen out with a friend, which means argue and be on bad terms with someone. I eat a lot of sweets. I hope my teeth don't fall out, which means become loose and attached, usually hair or teeth. Now, phrasal verbs can be useful for IELTS, particularly to improve your speaking and letter writing when using informal phrasal verbs. As with any new vocabulary, you have to be very careful with the way you learn them. Its usage needs to be natural. If you learn some phrases, try to fit them in your speaking or writing, you'll get a higher score. Without knowing them properly, it may sound unnatural, and you make mistakes, which will be noticed by the examiner. Now, the aim of this lesson is to show you how they can be used in an IELTS context, so the words have been placed in answers to IELTS type speaking questions. There are more formal types of phrasal verbs, but the focus here is on informal ones. But to emphasize again, the words can change according to tense and context. So as you learn them, do some internet research on each one to know how it can vary. So here are some phrasal verbs with their meaning. So hang out means spend time relaxing, which is informal. To catch up with means meet someone after a period of time and find out what they have been doing. Cut down or back on means reduce. Give something up means quit or stop doing it. Cut out means stop eating something like permanently or for a long time. Find out means discover. Get along or on means like each other. Fallout means argue and be on bad terms with someone. Clean up means tidy or clean. Come across means find something unexpectedly. So here are some examples of how they're used in sentences, particularly in the speaking section. So the phrasal verbs are in red. What do you normally do at the weekends? I usually just hang out with my friends. We'll go to the cinema or something. Unfortunately, I don't get a chance to catch up with them often as we are all so busy with work. Second, do you have a healthy lifestyle? I don't think I really do. Something I definitely need to do is cut down on the amount I smoke or even give it up completely. I would also like to cut out red meat from my diet. I've read that both of those are unhealthy. I found out recently that my father has cancer and he smoked a lot when he was younger. Third question, do you like the place where you live? Yes, I live with some college friends. There are several of us in the house, so it's crowded, but we get along well, so we have not had any serious problems. I fell out with one guy who lived there because he played his music too loud, but he has moved out now. Do you like to collect things? Not anymore, but the other day I was cleaning up my room when I came across an old album of football stickers. I used to collect them when I was younger.